Thank you, Brian.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me. Yes, I was last talked to the Society in 2022, around the time my book Northerners of History came out, and that's sold more than 45,000 copies so far. So this evening I'm going to try and do something quite ambitious, which is try to summarize the whole history of the relationship between the various parts of the Isles we live in, based on my new book, These Isles. But it's not easy, but strap yourselves in, and I promise there is no test at the end, and I'll try to get you away before the football starts. I should say that my books are not all historical narrative. Mixed in with the narrative, there are chapters on social and cultural themes to try to bring the people to life. So in this case, there are chapters on writers and artists, popular culture, notable women, the story of the minority languages, the story of the smaller isles, the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, etc. But this evening I'll stick mostly to the central narrative with a few local references for context. Now, the story of the Isles over the centuries has been a kaleidoscope of overlapping and often conflicting identities. Along the way, their inhabitants pioneered the Industrial Revolution and created history's largest empire, covering almost a quarter of the globe, with consequences that remain with us today. Emigration and empire have created a huge diaspora, a number of people around the world who can claim descent from British or Irish emigrants has been estimated at about 200 million, or almost treble the Isles' current population. Now, I should say I'm going to intersperse things with a few very short readings from the book as I go along, just to try to, more colourful bits, just to try and bring it to life. So I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from the very start of chapter 1. A small group of adults and children walked along the mudflats of a river estuary, leaving a trail behind them. Who were they? Their footprints are the earliest evidence so far of humans in Britain, Ireland, and the surrounding isles. They are also the oldest human footprints outside Africa. These footprints were exposed briefly in 2013 on the beach at Haysborough in Norfolk, and you can just about make them out in the middle of the photo here in the mud. Using pollen in sediment layers, scientists were able to date the footprints to between 850,000 and 950,000 years ago. Now, archaeology affords only glimpses of these isles' early inhabitants, making it hard to be sure how far and how quickly they spread. Later inhabitants would have a profound influence on the world through discovery, industry, wars, the slave trade, and the most powerful empire ever known. All that, of course, is a brief pinprick in our story. More than 99% of human history in Europe took place in the Stone Age. For much of that time, Britain was not an island. It was joined to the continent by a wide land bridge that we call Doggerland, now under the North Sea. And early humans came across in search of food in warmer spells during the last ice age. Now, those early humans spread around the Isles, creating sites such as Orkney's ritual landscape, the Boyne Valley in Ireland, and Stonehenge in England, whose bluestones are thought to have been transported 140 miles from Preseli in southwest Wales. Britain-speaking Celtic languages held sway across the Isles for centuries until the Romans and then the Anglo-Saxons came. It used to be believed that the Celts were an ethnic group that came from continental Europe in a wave of invasions, but a lack of evidence of large-scale arrivals has led to the view that the languages probably spread by a hazier process of cultural exchange and slow migration. The Romans invaded successfully in 43 AD or CE, overcoming resistance from figures such as Boudicca here, and stayed for more than 350 years. Gradually, they expanded through what we now call England and Wales and drove up into Caledonia, though they never managed to occupy it in a sustained way. The Romans' withdrawal set off a chain of migrations and resettlements, reshaping the Isles' populations. Small kingdoms reasserted themselves and struggled against each other and against Anglo-Saxon incomers. The Vikings' arrival at the end of the 8th century further reshaped the map. Southwest Lancashire is littered with Viking place names, including Skelmersdale and Widnes. Runcorn was founded by Ethelfled of Mercia as a fortification to guard against Viking invasion. And towards the end of the first millennium, there was consolidation as the nations we recognise as England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales began to emerge. Christianity established itself. St. Patrick was the most famous of missionaries to Ireland and northern Britain. He was from a well-off Romanised family in western Britain, and there are various candidates for where, including Wales and the Carlisle area. He was captured at the age of 16 by Irish raiders and shipped as a slave to Ireland, but he escaped and trained as a priest, and then returned to Ireland to preach the gospel. St. Augustine, meanwhile, became the first Archbishop of Canterbury and established the Roman form of Christianity, which prevailed in England. The MacAlpin dynasty controlled the territory then known as Alba, and now Scotland. There was a setback for this dynasty when a king called Donchad I, or Duncan I, was killed by troops belonging to a noble called Macbethad or Macbeth, later rendered by William Shakespeare into an archetype of bloodthirsty treachery. Macbeth ruled for 17 years before he was killed by troops commanded by Donchad's son. The 10th century's second half saw the swift rise in Ireland of a man called Brian Boruma or Boru, king of the southern province of Munster, who came close to unifying Ireland for a short time in a period when it had about 150 kings. There was resistance, however. At the Battle of Clontarf near Dublin, his armies defeated a revolt, but Brian Boru himself was killed. In the Victorian era, Irish nationalists nonetheless proclaimed Brian Boru as a national hero, similar to the English cult of Alfred the Great. And in the 11th century, in Wales, one Griffith ap Llywelyn, originally the King of Gwynedd, became the only Welsh king ever to rule over the entire territory of Wales, which he achieved for just 6 or 7 years. After William the Conqueror's Norman invasion in 1066, a French-speaking ascendancy spread across the Isles over the next 3 centuries, bringing social, political and economic change. Wales became a virtual colony, while Anglo-Norman adventurers conquered Eastern Ireland. In Scotland, kings welcomed Anglo-Norman settlers and gave them land, though that didn't prevent almost 600 years of intermittent warfare between Scotland and England. The Normans built almost 1,000 castles in England and more than 300 in Wales, with others in Scotland and Ireland. They built cathedrals and abbeys and introduced French religious orders and colonies of monks. There wasn't much intermarriage between the Anglo-Norman aristocrats and the Anglo-Saxon natives until around the 14th century. And Edward I, known as Longshanks, England's king at the end of the 13th century, became known as the Hammer of the Scots and the Welsh, trying to establish an English empire within the Isles. He incorporated Wales into England and gave it an English-style administrative system. In Scotland, there was resistance led by one William Wallace. The enigmatic Wallace, a minor noble from Ayrshire, has been celebrated by 19th century historians as a national hero, debunked by others as a self-serving outlaw, and immortalised by Mel Gibson in the film Braveheart. William Wallace won the Battle of Stirling Bridge, but later he was defeated at Falkirk and eventually executed. Another patriot avenger, the wily and ruthless Robert the Bruce, defeated a larger English army at Bannockburn near Stirling, the most celebrated victory in Scottish history. During the Tudor era, all parts of the Isles became subordinated to some degree to the English crown. The Reformation was taking place across Europe, and Henry VIII broke with Rome over his marital problems. The Reformation divided Ireland, which remained predominantly Catholic, from England, Wales, and Scotland, which eventually came to accept Protestantism in differing forms. In Wales, Henry tightened his grip by having the English Parliament pass laws that integrated Wales with England in legal terms, abolished the Welsh legal system, and banned the Welsh language from any official role. Henry made himself King of Ireland, upgraded from a lordship. A thorn in Elizabeth I's side was her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, and she's pretty colourful, so I'll read you a little bit about her. I hope you're not too squeamish for this bit. Mary, Queen of Scots, vivacious, beautiful, and frustrating, did not lack a sense of drama. Remember that the theatre of the whole world is wider than the kingdom of England, she is said to have warned those trying her for treason at Fotheringay Castle in Northamptonshire. Found guilty of endorsing a plot to murder her cousin Elizabeth I of England, Mary wore a crimson petticoat, the colour of Catholic martyrdom, at her execution on the 8th of February 1587, aged 44. It took 2 axe blows to separate her head from her body, and even then the executioner had to use his axe to saw through a remaining tendon. According to one witness, her lips moved for some minutes after her head was cut off, and her lapdog emerged from hiding among her skirts. As the executioner tried to hold up her head, the auburn curls turned out to be a wig, and her skull fell to the ground, revealing a mat of grey stubble. If events had turned out differently, Mary might have been Queen of Scotland, France, and England. She ruled Scotland personally for just 6 years, before she was forced to abdicate in favour of her 1-year-old son, James, after being accused, among other things, of involvement in the murder of her husband, Lord Darnley, the evidence for which appears circumstantial. Mary fled southward, seeking Elizabeth's protection, but was held captive for almost 19 years, perceived as a threat and a rallying point for Catholic rebels. She was undone when Elizabeth's spymaster set a trap that enabled him to read her coded letters. For centuries, historians have variously portrayed her as an adulterer and murderer, as the heroic victim of scheming noblemen, or as a tragic failure. She certainly made some disastrous choices. And after Elizabeth, the Scottish and English crowns became united under Mary's son, James VI of Scotland and James I of England, a man described by one historian as one of the most complicated neurotics to sit on the throne. He survived the Gunpowder Plot, a failed scheme by militant Catholics to blow up the House of Lords and kill the king. One of the plotters, Guy Fawkes from York, allegedly said the intention was to blow you Scotch beggars back to your native mountains. Tensions exploded in the 17th century wars of the Three Kingdoms, civil wars sparked off by disputes over religion, power and money, in which Charles I was executed. England and Wales may have lost up to 4% of their population through fighting or disease, a higher proportion than in the First World War. Deaths were higher still in Scotland and especially Ireland. Liverpool, Warrington, Halton Castle and Lee were all in the thick of the fighting. Oliver Cromwell, commander of Parliament's army, earned lasting enmity for massacres at Drogheda and Wexford in Ireland. Later, he became England's Lord Protector or military dictator. The monarchy was restored in 1660, but the Catholic James II was overthrown in the 1688 Protestant Revolution and finally defeated at the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland. On the 1st of May 1707, England and Scotland united in the new Kingdom of Great Britain, bringing rejoicing and relief in London, but a more sombre mood in Scotland, where there had been riots and protests before the Scottish Parliament's decision to adopt the treaty, ending its own independent existence after almost 5 centuries. England desperately wanted a union to help secure a Protestant succession to the childless Queen Anne. Scotland, for its part, was simply broke, so the economic opportunities of union offered a potential lifeline. It had suffered failed harvests known as the 7 ill years. In its attempt to establish a colony in the Americas at Darien on the Isthmus of Panama had ended in disaster, absorbing about a quarter of the nation's capital. The Scots, despite their initial lack of enthusiasm for the Union, were destined to play a huge part in the British Empire. Arguably, the Union opened the way for the Scottish Enlightenment as well as for an expansion of trade. In recent decades, though, the Union has looked less secure as factors such as religion and empire declined, causing many Scots to question its value. There were Jacobite rebellions in 1715 and 1745. However, access to London and the Empire opened up attractive career opportunities for ambitious middle and upper class Scots. Thousands of them, mainly lowlanders, gained positions of power in politics, the civil service, the army and navy, in trade and colonial enterprises. Scotland's economy grew rapidly in areas such as tobacco and linen, benefiting from trade with the colonies. The new religious fervour of Methodism, initially within the Church of England, had a big impact from the mid-18th century, particularly in Wales, which developed its own distinctive form and became a fortress of nonconformity for 2 centuries. Welsh Methodism became particularly strong in Welsh-speaking North Wales, and Welsh hymns and choirs became a great art form. Welsh educational and cultural revolution was underway in the 18th century, boosted by the benevolence of a woman called Bridget Bevan from Carmarthenshire, a wealthy woman who supported a system of circulating schools created by a clergyman. Russia's Empress Catherine the Great was so impressed by Welsh literacy standards that she commissioned a report on the schools. Ireland, meanwhile, was largely controlled by what became known as a Protestant ascendancy, established by land seizures by English and Scottish settlers in the 17th century. A small group of Anglo-Irish families loyal to the Anglican Church of Ireland owned most of the farmland, where the work was largely done by Catholic peasants. So by the early 18th century, although Catholics made up about 3/4 of the population, they owned only 14% of the land, and penal laws excluded them from most areas of public life. Tensions grew towards the century's end. In Belfast, a group of Presbyterians, themselves frustrated about being excluded from power by the Anglicans, formed the Society of United Irishmen, inspired by the American and French revolutions. They sought to make common cause with Ireland's Catholic majority and became an underground Republican movement. The government crackdown forced the conspirators into the open, leading to the Irish Rebellion of 1798, a series of uncoordinated risings. A French expeditionary force arrived and was defeated, leading to the capture of a man called Theobald Wolfe Tone, the United Irish leader who had arranged the French intervention. Largely as a result of these events, Irish self-government ended when the Irish and British parliaments enacted the Acts of Union, creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland on the 1st of January 1801. The Industrial Revolution, meanwhile, got underway in England's Midlands and the North. Northwest England became the centre of the cotton textile industry. 1693, Lancashire was the 35th wealthiest of England's 39 counties by tax data. By 1843, it was second. Southwest Lancashire's watch and clockmakers also found themselves in demand to make gears to drive new factory equipment, and clusters of chemical industries were created at Widnes and Runcorn, perhaps a mixed blessing because of the high level of pollution they also involved. Before long, the Industrial Revolution was spreading to other parts of the Isles, notably the west of Scotland, Ulster and South Wales. It enabled populations to grow and eventually allowed living standards to rise. For those living through it, it brought both new opportunities and some wrenching social change. Industrialisation in Scotland developed particularly in the later 19th century when coal, iron, steel and shipbuilding transformed the nation into a global manufacturer. In Ireland, the main large-scale industrialisation was in East Ulster, where Belfast's population soared on the back of its linen and shipbuilding industries. And the Industrial Revolution in Wales took hold notably in the southeast, creating ironworks and coal mines. I think it's be a good bit to read you something about the story of emigration and immigration from around the Isles, which has been such an important part of the story, particularly during the Industrial Revolution. Migrant tales. People have migrated into, around and out of the Isles since the earliest times. Some travelled in order to conquer others or seek a better life, or because they were coerced or simply to survive. It could be tough, as it was, for example, for John Gray, a Scottish 18th century migrant in England, who scraped a living for several years as a wandering musician after his father died, until justices of the peace in Yorkshire labelled him a vagrant and sent him back to Edinburgh. People's lives sometimes ended in tragedy, as happened in the case of 40-year-old Bridget Callaghan, an Irish woman who migrated to England via Liverpool during the Great Famine in 1850. She set off to walk with her small children and young cousin to join a relative in Yorkshire, but she froze to death on the second night under a hedge in Bold near St. Helens. The nation's populations have been created entirely by waves of migration, including early humans, Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Norse people and Normans. Significant internal migration has taken place within the Isles too, particularly during the Industrial Revolution, with England the main recipient. A number of English emigrants were themselves drawn to South Wales and Ulster, while Scottish Highlanders and the Irish went to Glasgow and the west of Scotland. Irish and Welsh people went to places notably including the Liverpool area. The story of emigration from the UK is, if anything, even more dramatic, as Britain built an empire that covered a fifth of the globe. It formed part of a vast migration of European and Asian peoples that began in the 1500s, the age of exploration. The result is a huge diaspora. Americans with Irish forebears have included former President Barack Obama, also with Scottish roots, Dublin-born actress Maureen O'Hara, and the boxer Muhammad Ali, who had a great-grandfather from County Clare. Most countries send out oil or iron, steel or gold or some other crop, but Ireland has had only one export, and that is its people, said President John F. Kennedy, whose 4 grandparents were children of Irish immigrants. The Scottish diaspora has included US Presidents Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and, of course, Donald Trump. As I said, by the end of the 19th century, the British Empire ruled a quarter of the world's population. English people drove much of its creation and were responsible for many of its excesses. The Scots were also to prove enthusiastic in seizing opportunities. For Wales and Ireland, it was perhaps a more ambiguous experience. Both nations are often described as England's first colonies, yet there were also many Welsh and Irish people who themselves became active colonizers. The early 19th century around the Isles was turbulent, marked by the Napoleonic Wars, explosive population growth, food shortages caused by climatic disruption, and radical protests in England's rural south as well as in the industrialising north and in Wales and Scotland. Manchester had the Peterloo massacre in 1819. Industrialisation in Wales led to conflicts such as the 1831 Merthyr Rising, in which a crowd seized control of the town, leading soldiers to shoot dead about 20 people. In Ireland, a man called Daniel O'Connell, a lawyer who would become known as the Liberator, rallied support for Catholic emancipation. The government eventually responded by removing tests that barred Catholics in the UK from Parliament and the higher offices of the judiciary and the state. Ireland, sadly, was devastated by the Great Famine of 1845 to 52, caused by repeated failures of the potato crop, in which about 1 million people died and more than 1 million emigrated. Many of them settled in northwest England. Ireland was particularly vulnerable because it had small land holdings coupled with a large increase in population. Nationalists blamed Britain for an inadequate response, pointing to the fact that Irish people were starving as food continued to be exported from Ireland to England. Ireland had a population of almost 8.2 million in 1841, but lost almost a quarter of that during the next 3 decades. And even today, the combined populations of the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland have not yet reached the pre-famine total. So unsurprisingly, perhaps, much of the 19th century second half was taken up by the Irish question. In 1858, an Irish Republican Brotherhood was founded as a secret society dedicated to armed rebellion. In 1882, in what became known as the Phoenix Park murders, the newly appointed Chief Secretary for Ireland and his Undersecretary was stabbed to death in Dublin by an even more radical group, the Irish National Invincibles. An Irish National Land League was formed to try to enable tenant farmers to own the land they worked on. Its president was a man called Charles Stewart Parnell, a young Protestant landowner. He pushed for Home Rule and made common cause with William Gladstone, the Liberal Prime Minister, who twice introduced bills to try to enact Irish Home Rule, though both failed. The issue split his Liberal Party, and Home Rule was also strongly opposed by Unionists in Ulster. At this point, I'm going to shift of gear just to lighten the mood a little. I thought I'd read you a little bit from the start of the chapter on the growth of popular culture, which is an important feature of the Industrial Revolution. Leisure blooms. If there is one place that generations of English comedians grew to fear, it was the Glasgow Empire, notorious during the 20th century as the graveyard of comics, especially English ones. Those who had a hard time included Bob Monkhouse and Tommy Cooper. Des O'Connor was so badly received that he faked fainting and was dragged off stage. Max Miller refused to make a return visit, saying, "I'm a comic, not a missionary." Mike and Bernie Winter's act started routinely with Mike on stage playing a lively tune on the clarinet. After a couple of minutes, Bernie's face peeked through the curtains, wearing a silly grin. Legend has it that an audience member then shouted, "Ah, Christ, there's two of them." It was possible to win audiences over, as Morecambe and Wise gradually did, but it was tough. Locals had usually been drinking in the pub after a hard week's manual labour and had little patience with acts they thought thin or slow. Scottish comedian Janie Godley explained, "I've seen comedians struggle because they let the audience smell the fear. If they get a sniff of that, they'll attack like a bunch of straggly one-legged dogs from Easterhouse. Glasgow audiences are unforgiving, but if you hit them on the funny bone, they will go with you down 100 routes of madness." Comedy was a release from tough conditions. Life for many in the Industrial Revolution was grim, but real incomes rose in the later 19th century and people started to get some leisure time. That led to a growth in popular entertainment in the form of music halls, variety theatres, shopping and excursions. There were new parks and libraries and museums. A Saturday half-holiday was introduced, crucial to the rise of football as a professional spectator sport, and a week-long unpaid summer holiday appeared in several towns. Into the 20th century, the UK was on the winning side in the First World War, but at a high cost in lives for all the home nations. In Ireland, Republicans staged the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916. Sinn Féin, the pro-independence party, won most Irish seats at the 1918 election. Its MPs refused to take their seats at Westminster and proclaimed a republic. The IRA fought a 2-year War of Independence, after which Britain passed an act partitioning Ireland, granting Home Rule separately, both to the 6 northeasternmost counties of Ulster and to Ireland's remaining 26 counties. The Irish Free State came into being in 1922, but the treaty terms were bitterly opposed by Eamon de Valera, Sinn Féin's president, which led to a civil war lasting several months before petering out in victory for the pro-treaty side. The Great Depression in the 1930s was perhaps in some ways less severe overall around the Isles than in countries such as America, but it was concentrated in the older industrial areas, with mass unemployment in northern England, South Wales, Clydeside and Belfast. The UK, which had been a divided society between the wars, pulled together during the Second World War. Shipyards and heavy engineering factories in Glasgow and Clydeside played a key part, and the war also helped to revive the Welsh economy. After the war, Britain's largest steelworks opened at Margam in Port Talbot in 1951. Scotland, the Unionists, later known as the Conservatives, won a record 50.1% of the vote in 1955, but by the late 1950s, unemployment was starting to rise, and Scotland had seen little economic diversification. Unemployment was also rising in Wales, where Cardiff had been recognised as the capital as recently as 1955. Ireland declared itself a republic in 1949, but it missed out on the post-war boom, with its economy growing by only 1% a year during the 1950s, leading to still more emigration. In Scotland in 1967, the Scottish National Party's Winifred Ewing, a young Glasgow solicitor, won a famous by-election at Hamilton, one of Labour's safest seats. In Wales, Gwynfor Evans, president of the nationalist Plaid Cymru Party, won a by-election at Carmarthen in 1966, his party's first parliamentary seat. And in Northern Ireland, frustration among nationalists about discrimination against the Catholic minority boiled over into what became known as the Troubles, lasting 30 years. James Callaghan's Labour government held referendums on Scottish and Welsh devolution in 1979. Scotland returned a narrow majority in favour, but failed to meet a threshold of 40% of the electorate that Parliament had set, and Wales voted by almost 4-1 against. Margaret Thatcher, who became Conservative Prime Minister in 1979, survived an assassination attempt by the Provisional IRA in the 1984 Brighton hotel bombing. I have a very strange personal connection here in that I was actually interviewed by Special Branch in connection with the Brighton hotel bombing. The reason being that I'd stayed at the Grand Hotel 3 weeks earlier in my capacity as a journalist to cover the Trades Union Congress, which was meeting in Brighton. And I stayed on the left-hand side there, the wing of the hotel where the bomber had planted the bomb. But anyway, they never charged me. A deep recession was severely felt in the early 1980s, particularly by traditional industries in Scotland, Northern England and Wales. Mrs. Thatcher finally departed in 1990 after Sir Geoffrey Howe, born in Port Talbot, after Geoffrey Howe resigned, born in Port Talbot, resigned as Deputy Prime Minister, and she was challenged for the leadership by Michael Heseltine, born in Swansea. Her successor, John Major's credibility was severely dented by Black Wednesday in 1992, when the Chancellor, Norman Lamont, born in Shetland, was forced to withdraw sterling from the European exchange rate mechanism. Ireland, meanwhile, was seeing social liberalisation, particularly during the presidency of Mary Robinson in the 1990s. The constitutional ban on abortion was softened in 1992. Homosexual sex was decriminalised and divorce legalised after a referendum. And after a disappointing economic performance for much of the state's existence, Ireland became one of the world's fastest growing economies by the mid-1990s, known as the Celtic Tiger. Labour's Tony Blair, born in Edinburgh and educated there at Fetters College, came to office in 1997. September that year, a referendum in Scotland resulted in 74% voting for a Scottish Parliament. In Wales, voters backed a National Assembly by a narrow majority of 50.3%. Blair's government also made a major breakthrough in Northern Ireland after 3 decades of conflict, reaching the 1998 Good Friday Agreement with the help of US President Bill Clinton. That created a Northern Ireland Assembly and power-sharing executive. So, when the Scottish Parliament convened in May 1999, Winnie Ewing, by now presiding officer, opened the session by saying, "The Scottish Parliament, adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707, is hereby reconvened." However, any expectations that devolution might settle the UK's constitutional future proved short-lived. The picture has remained in flux, as it has in one way or another for much of the Isles' history. Almost a century after most of Ireland left the Union, Scotland held an independence referendum in 2014 in which voters rejected independence by 55% to 45%. Northern Ireland's Assembly and power-sharing executive have been suspended 6 times because of various disputes. And in the 2016 EU referendum, England and Wales voted to leave, but Scotland and Northern Ireland voted remain. Scotland's politics has been particularly fraught. Alex Salmond, the former SNP First Minister, was tried and acquitted on charges of sexual misconduct. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's first female leader, was a talented communicator, but struggled to find a path to independence. She resigned in 2023, saying the job takes its toll on you, and she was unhappily back in the news a couple of weeks ago. After recent elections to the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, and with elections due to the Northern Ireland Assembly by May next year, the picture of the relationship between the various parts of the Isles continues to look volatile, and it's been that way for centuries. So that's your whistle-stop tour of 900,000 years of history. I hope I haven't bludgeoned you with too many facts and dates, one on top of the other. Try in the book very much to emphasize the people, all the many fascinating people that have come from all parts of the Isles and the way the peoples have interacted over the centuries. It may be all you want to know, but obviously there's more detail in the book, which is widely available from bookshops and online. But it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you again. Thank you for listening to me so patiently. And if there's time for any questions, I would be more than happy to try to answer them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really enjoyed that. And in fact, I'll just make a comment here that you grabbed my attention with your first slide. The sand with the water and the footprints in it, because I wondered where you were actually going to comment that was, as I remember quite a number of years ago, that similar footprints had been found in Formby.
Yes.
In the southwest Lancashire. Yes.
It's a very similar phenomenon. Not quite as old, I think, as these ones were, but a very similar phenomenon. Yes, that these ancient footsteps somehow survive in the mud.
Yes, they identified children running around and playing, as well as presumably what was the parents as well. So I don't know whether anybody else remembers that. Well, Carol says it's extremely interesting, but everybody else is quiet. I hope they're not watching the football already.
No.
Not started yet. 10 minutes
well,
yet.
Well, the photograph behind my profile there.
Oh yes.
That is the Bourse Beach in Cardiganshire, and there's there's an ancient forest in the beach itself. The stumps are really ancient there. There is a bit of a legend behind it, but it's probably not the truth. Yeah, but I don't know if anybody really knows how old they are, but they're very, very old. They come up on rough tides and things like that when we've had high tides or low tides, and yeah, it's often seen then. But quite prominent, the stumps in the beach. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. Ancient, I don't know how ancient.
All right. Denise is commenting that she enjoyed your talk very much. So interesting. And something I agree with. You read so well, it's a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Many years ago, I was a student actor.
That's coming through, isn't it?
Can I just say,
sorry, Anise.
I just want to say that was really, really good. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, Marge is saying, and she's from America, they're very informative, and she really enjoyed the pictures and the sketches. They were great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They were really good. Thank you.
Yes. Well, everybody is in agreement. It was a very interesting, informative talk. We've got a comment here regarding the map of the colonies. Could you tell us where you found it, please?
Yeah, I've been asked about that one. It's an odd one in many ways. I was just looking for a kind of striking image that looked like the British Empire. It's actually an early map from 1866, so it doesn't have quite all of it on it. Places like South Africa are not on it at that time. The empire reached its fullest extent just after the First World War, so this was still quite early. And some people have pointed to the odd fact that Greenland is recorded as a British colony on this map, which I hadn't realised. I can't explain.
No. I'm going to turn the recording off now, but if anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comment, that's fine.